Good evening, everybody. Thanks again for listening. Good evening. Good evening. Hello. Hello. My name is Nelson Brown, and this is the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I am so happy to join you all for again this evening. I want to let you guys know that it's been 5 months since I started this broadcast. And I'm so excited to be with you all this evening. And tonight we're going to have really, really great discussions, and we're going to kick off our Black History Month, specials for this evening. I took some time, and as you all know, it's been really, really rough for me. I've been trying to grieve, and I've been trying to, I've been trying to put myself back together ever since the passing of my dad. Last week, I devoted the entire broadcast with our boss, with our CEO of Awesome God Radio, AJ Antoine Jefferson. I spoke with him about dads, father figures, male mentors, male leadership, but we were both devoting the entire broadcast to our dads, and I was really, really glad to have that opportunity to sit down and speak with him about that. And I'm still grieving, and I'm still going through a lot right now, emotionally, mentally, physically, and psychologically. So I want to thank you all again for tuning in. Your support every week, it definitely means a lot to me, and I don't take any of it for granted. I cherish every single opportunity that's presented to me. And I wanted to start off with a few announcements. I wanted to let you all know that tonight we're going to be talking about two figures. So for the next few weeks, for the next 3 weeks, we are going to be speaking about historical figures in the Black community. So tonight we are going to have a discussion about two figures. I'm going to speak about one man, one woman in the Black community to kick off Black History Month for the next few weeks. And so we can talk about the work that they've done, and I'm going to tie it back into my overall discussion for the evening. So I want to talk about, for the first half of the show, I want to have a discussion about the importance of literacy, for children, in the field of education. And for the second half of the show, I want to talk about the arts, between writing, between screenwriting, between poetry, acting, and different forms of art. So for the second half of the show, I'm going to talk about what it means to be in the field of arts with the public figure that I'll be talking about this evening. But for the first half, I'm going to talk about literacy for children. So the two figures that I will be talking about this evening are Levar Burton and Ruby Dee. I dropped those hints on my Facebook page a couple of days ago, but I think one of my clues and one of my hints that I dropped, I think I spelled Ossie Davis wrong. I think I put Z, but I think it's supposed to be an S. But I think you all definitely got the point. So I'm going to start off talking about Levar Burton. Just in case you all don't know who he is a famous actor, a notorious actor. He was born in West Germany on February 16th, 1957, and he attended college, and he was chosen for the lead role in the television miniseries called Roots, which launched his career. And in 1983, he became the host of PBS's series called Reading Rainbow, and it was a show aimed at teaching young children how to read, and it won 5 Emmy Awards over its more than 20-year run. So it ran for approximately 23 seasons between 1983 and 2009. I was a big fan of Reading Rainbow growing up, so I definitely enjoyed watching that, and I definitely enjoyed listening to a lot of the books that he read and a lot of the children on his broadcast. He was the executive producer of, and he was the creator and host of. It was really, really great to see, an African-American kind of role model, to display the importance of reading and writing for me at such a young age. And he was also famous for his role in the mid-'80s, a series called Star Trek: The Next Generation between 1987 and 1994. So I just want to start off by talking about a few of his most prominent pieces of work. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for tuning in. I want to talk about his work in a mini-series called Roots. Now, if you have not seen Roots, you really, really, really need to, I would recommend watching the movie the original movie, the 1977 version, and then watching the 2016 version. But I also want you to read the book. Just in case you don't know what Roots is, Roots, it was a book, from my understanding, it was written in 1973 by a prominent author named Alex Haley. So the film is just an adaptation of the book. But sometimes when you read books and when you watch movies, it can put a spin on the way that the story is told. So I would encourage you all to watch Roots and to read the book, Alex Haley's book. The book is awesome. It's amazing. It's really authentic and powerful. And especially for the Black community, it's not only like for the Black community, but it's also world history. It's a part of American history. So I encourage you all to read it, and I encourage you all to watch that adaptation. But if you decide to watch it with your kids, just be mindful that, because this is a movie about the history of slavery, and because Alex Haley is tracing his roots back to Africa, and because of the content of the movie, I would strongly advise you to just be mindful. If you decide to watch it with your kids, I would watch it. I'd advise you to watch it by yourself first if you've never ever seen the movie Roots. It's a powerful movie. It's historic, but it can be really, really graphic because of the content that is in the movie. So I encourage you all to just watch it by yourselves and just talk about the movie with your kids, because the miniseries Roots, it speaks about American history, world history. And it talks a lot about, it connects the dots and brings us to where we are today. And LeVar Burton, he played the young Kunta Kinte, which is a prominent character for the first half of the miniseries Roots. And he did such a phenomenal job, and he received nominations for it, as a prominent actor. And that was his first movie. So I encourage you all to, again, read the book and watch the movies, the 1977 version and the 2016 version of the movie. But make sure you read the book too, because again, the book and the film adaptations can sometimes put a different twist on things. But again, I encourage you all to exercise caution when you talk about this with your kids and when you watch this with your children. There are a lot of historical roots that are associated with the movie Roots, but I also want, I want all of you guys to exercise caution when you share it with your kids and when you watch it with your kids. And again, I would advise you to watch it by yourself first, because the content is very, very graphic in the movie. But again, the history behind it is the most powerful. And the film Reading Rainbow, the television series Reading Rainbow that aired on PBS's network from 1983 to 2009 for about 23 seasons, give or take a few. It aimed at teaching young children how to read. And I think that's so important nowadays, especially in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we're all kind of crammed and stuck in the house. We all have the opportunity to pick up a good book, and we all have the opportunity to read to our children, now. And I think that it's important to talk to our kids about the importance of reading and writing. And I pulled up an article from educationweek.org, and it was entitled Teaching Kids How to Read During COVID-19, a Big Remote Learning Challenge. And it was written and published on October 21st, 2020, which is of last year. And it says that this special report examines how many of the nation's elementary schools are staring down a daunting new challenge: teach young children to read without being able to interact with them in person, using instead digital tools and video conferencing platforms in sweeping new ways that are mostly untested. Featuring exclusive survey data on digital reading instruction from the EdWeek Research Center, the report examines how the new consensus on how to best teach reading should be incorporated into digital early literacy curricular materials, the extent to which the digital curricula and literacy tools already in widespread use are integrating the science of reading into their products, the best approaches for teaching, reading, and remote or hybrid learning environments, and one teacher's take on how she has handled the challenges of reading during the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are many more articles that tie into reading and literacy that I wanted to talk about, as we for the first half of the show, as we talk about LeVar Burton and his work, not only in the miniseries Roots from a historical standpoint, but also with his series, with the series Reading Rainbow. In that series, he was the executive producer. He was not only the host, but he was also the creator and the executive producer of that series. So if you grew up in the early 80s to the mid 2000s, Reading Rainbow. And if you've watched PBS, Reading Rainbow, and you're familiar with who he is. And it said that he was, 2 years into his education, he attended the University of Southern California, and he auditioned for a role in Alex Haley's television miniseries Roots. And again, the film Roots, the miniseries Roots, it tells the story about Alex Haley's family from 7 different generations. And LeVar Burton was chosen as the lead role, as the young Kunta Kinte. And again, it aired in 1977. And this article says that he became the poster boy for this discussion of race relations. And then later on, a few years later in the early 80s, that's when Reading Rainbow came into play. And the series won 26 Emmys and a Peabody Award, among various other awards. And again, it was on the air for over 20 years, and I think about 23 seasons, if I'm not mistaken. And again, he received 12 personal Emmys for his work as the host and producer of the show. And again, it's how to read and write was imperative. But to revert back to what I was talking about in terms of teaching kids how to read and write during the pandemic, and in the midst of a remote learning environment or a hybrid learning environment, there's another article that's been written by a gentleman named Benjamin Harold on the 29th of September last year. It says, schools already struggled to teach reading right. Now they have to do it online. And he says that, ready or not, the nation's elementary school educators are staring down at a daunting new challenge, teaching hundreds of thousands of young children to read without being able to interact with them in person. So this is kind of similar to what I just read to you all, but I'm going to scroll down to the second paragraph where he talks about, even before public schools shut their physical doors to help slow the spread of the coronavirus, many educators were struggling with this most fundamental of tasks, especially concerning was schools' scattershot, often unscientific approach to teaching the basic building blocks of reading, such as understanding how sounds are put together to form words. That's likely one reason why just 35% of American fourth graders are proficient in reading, according to the most recent results of the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Now, with thousands of schools reopening virtually or using a mix of online and in-person instruction, even those teachers trying the kind of phonics instruction supported by cognitive science will be forced to do so remotely. In online environments, they are still learning to navigate. Many more educators appear likely to try a hodgepodge of early literacy software programs and digital apps, many of which have shown no evidence of effectiveness, and almost all of which are best suited as supplements to regular classroom teaching as primary instructional tools. Add it all up, and America's K-12 system is about to embark on a massive experiment with incredibly high stakes for an entire generation of young children. So I'm going to pause right there for a second, and I want to think about what that means. Let's unpack that article a little bit. So again, we are all in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are all stuck in the house. We are all trying to telework. We are all trying to learn. I know that for me, again, I'm a college student. I'm a sociology student at the University of Maryland in Baltimore County, UMBC. So I know that, it's been really, really great for me with the remote learning environment. I've definitely been able to keep up with a lot of my schoolwork as a result of the remote learning environment. But I'm also kind of sad because I'm looking at the timeline in terms of when we will come to a sense of normalcy. And when we will revert back to our sense of normalcy, when all of the restrictions are lifted and when we can have in-person instruction again. I'm really, really concerned because I transferred from CCBC into UMBC smack dab in the middle of the pandemic and in a remote learning environment. So I know that with all of the restrictions that have been put in place, I know that for our children, it can be really, really challenging for them because I feel like a lot of them are losing that sense of love and connection in terms of of missing their classmates missing their friends, not being able to speak with them in person, not being able to see them. So I do know that that's a huge challenge for a lot of students. And just sitting in front of a screen 8 hours, 5 days a week, I know that the attention span of some kids is just not there compared to the in-person instruction. And I know that right now they're in the process of trying to vaccinate our teachers so that our teachers can walk right back into the classroom, not necessarily COVID-free, but just in a healthier frame of mind, body, and spirit. So he goes on to say that the more realistic hope is that schools manage to tread water, making do under difficult conditions to ensure young readers don't completely miss out on a crucial window for building basic skills. The fear, though, is that such a catastrophe is already underway, especially for those students who are living in poverty, having special needs, or are still learning English. Huge gaps in access to technology remain. Coronavirus-related deaths, sickness, and economic hardship are causing mounting trauma, especially in the Black, Brown, and indigenous. Let me get this word correct. Indigenous. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. Communities bearing the brunt of the pandemic, and many schools already resistant to change were beset this summer by budget cuts and constantly shifting guidance from state and federal officials, leading them to provide early elementary teachers with little or no training around new forms of remote literacy instruction. A gentleman named Kyle Snow, a senior research associate for RMC Research Corporation, and he was a senior scholar at the National Association for the Education of Young Children. He says that we're in totally uncharted space. Figuring out how to consistently reach kids with a substantive instruction targeted at foundational skills is the critical challenge. But even if you assume that we had figured out how to do that, which we had not, we now have to dramatically shift what we're doing because of the pandemic. So again, we're talking about literacy. We're talking about the ways in which we can educate our children in the form of reading and writing. And again, Levar Burton, with his series that he was the executive producer, host, and creator of Reading Rainbow, I used to watch it all the time growing up. And a lot of the literature was extremely diverse. And throughout the 23 seasons or so that, he was on the air, he had a lot of famous authors, and he read a lot of books. And I even remember the theme song, Take a Look, It's in the Book, Reading Rainbow. I can go anywhere, I can do anything. And I just wanted to ask you guys, what are you doing and what provisions are you putting in place to make sure that your kids are reading every day or picking up a good book? And what provisions are you putting in place right now to ensure that, you can continue to feed the minds of children? Because you can learn a lot from just reading a book, picking up and reading a book. I told you guys that, I'm still in the process of reading, Finding Your Harmony by Allie Brooke. She's a former member of Fifth Harmony. She's also a singer and songwriter, and she's also a dancer. So right now I'm reading this book, and Finding Your Harmony, and I'm really enjoying it. I know that, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, where, we're all kind of locked in the house and we can't really go anywhere or do anything other than our essential activities, we can all pick up a good book to read. We can all learn something new from any book we pick up. And even though this is a kind of like a biography of her life, there are a lot of spiritual values that are affiliated with a lot of things that she chooses to share in this book. And again, she was my favorite member of Fifth Harmony because of her authentic story and because of her passion to help others and to be a leader in her community. I was drawn to her so much. And plus, I think she's cute. So I'm reading this book right now, but I'm also reading another book for one of my sociology courses about public health and the healthcare system. It's called Tapping the Wire, The Real Urban Crisis. And it features a conversation with another prominent figure, another author and speaker named David Simon, who shares a lot in this book as well. And we talk about the public health crisis in Baltimore City within this book. and we talk about all of the economic challenges, the educational disparities, and all of the issues that correspond with the reasons why that we are in the middle of a public health crisis. So Tapping the Wire is the book that I'm reading right now in one of my sociology courses. And we are learning a lot about the healthcare system, and not just about the healthcare system, but the public health crisis, the educational disparities, crime, poverty, they all go hand in hand. So this book has been really, really helpful for me as well. So these are just two books that I'm reading right now. Different topics, different genres, but I'm still feeding my mind, and I'm still learning a lot from, just reading these books, and from the content that is in these books. I'm able to share that with others, and in terms of reading comprehension, I'm able to articulate, to my professor and to my classmates about what we're learning, and that is what it's all about, and that is what I think that Levar Burton tried to convey with his series Reading Rainbow. It was that he wanted to encourage kids that picking up a book and reading a book and learning how to use your imagination and to use your creativity to your advantage. Like for instance, right now I'm working on the third installment of my book. It's a book of prayers, and it's called The Beauty in Us, Our Souls in Armor. And I'm releasing it on my dad's birthday, May 2nd. That's my plan. So right now I've been speaking with my editor, and she put her edits, she critiqued my book, and she's placed her edits on my book, and she said it was a lovely manuscript. I was thinking of the ways in which I could just reach young men and boys in my community in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, with a list of prayers and a list of devotionals to keep in mind. And her feedback has been really, really helpful. And I was even speaking to one of my guests, Mr. Jerry Royce Live, and his protege, Skeet Jones, wants me to come on and read to the kids, on his program. And I've been speaking with, my editor, Miss Morrison, about the process of writing my first children's book. I've already created my character, and I already have the storyline right now. And she's been encouraging me to just, take a look at books and to do some research about, children's books and children's series, and, what is age appropriate for the audience that I'm trying to reach. So it's all about learning and growing. It's all about thinking outside the box, and it's all about, exercising that creative muscle and using it to your advantage. So that's what, again, I think that Levar Burton was trying to convey in his series Reading Rainbow. And I think that he did a fantastic job, because it was an Emmy Award nominating series. He received Peabody Awards, and he's still a public speaker, a prominent speaker, a motivational speaker. So he still has speaking engagements. He's 63 years old, so he's still active in his community, and he's still devoted to teaching kids how to read and write, which is imperative nowadays, especially in the climate that we're in. So I think that, again, that him not just being a performer and producer, but also just being an advocate is what I think drew children to his series. I know that it drew me. I can only speak for me, but I know that, just by being an advocate, not just a performer or producer of the children's series, Reading Rainbow, but also as an advocate, I think that passion came across in his broadcast. I think that passion and that drive is what was demonstrated, through the television series. So I think that that's really, really important to note. And even in the series Star Trek, The Next Generation, where he was a part of from the late 80s to the early 90s, I think that his performance, in the arts, again, spoke for itself, in that situation. So I think that, again, I encourage you all to, again, look at the miniseries Roots. Watch the film, watch the original film, 1977 version, watch the 2016 version, the remake of it. And also I encourage you all to read Alex Haley's book, The Roots. It talks about his family, 7 generations. It goes back 7 generations. But again, I encourage you to exercise caution when you read, the book, or when you look at the film adaptation. If you share it with kids, please exercise caution, because there is content in the film that is very, very strong and powerful, but it's also very, very graphic. So I encourage you all again to exercise caution when you take a look at that film and when you share it with your kids. But it's important to learn about our history. It's important to know where we come from. This is not just our history as a Black community, but this is also American history, world history. So again, I keep emphasizing that because, again, this is Black History Month, and I wanted to kick off Black History Month talking about a few prominent figures. And as we dive into the second half of the show, I want to talk about another prominent figure. I dropped hints again. I think I spelled his name wrong, but that's her husband. But I want to talk about another prominent figure named Ruby Dee. And she pretty much did everything in her life. So as we make this transition to the second half of the show, I want to just talk about, the arts. I know that acting, singing, songwriting, playwriting, writing short stories, fiction, nonfiction, being an author, being a performer of some sort, all of that ties into the arts, or even just being an artist or an illustrator of some sort, a painter, a sculptor. All of that is some form of art, and it's some form of expression, and it's a tool that we use to convey what we want to convey to our audience, or to the people that follow our work. So I want to talk a little bit about the playwright, the actress, playwright, screenwriter, activist, poet, and journalist Ruby Dee. So she lived to be, I think, in 92 or 94. Let me look it up real quick. Okay, so she was 91. Right. Okay, so she was 91. So Ruby Dee, she was a prominent figure in the Black community, very eloquent, very classy, very professional lady, and she pretty much did it all. She was perhaps best known for starring in a 1961 film called A Raisin in the Sun, and she's also a civil rights activist. And Ossie Davis, she worked hand in hand with him throughout her career, to promote equality and to advocate, for, civil rights on behalf of, not just the Black community, but Black and brown people and minorities in general. And it says that she was born in Ohio. I'm reading, from the sources I've gathered. She was born in Ohio in 1922. She grew up in Harlem, and she's well known for her collaborations with her husband, and she spent decades in her career, and she's starred in films such as the Jackie Robinson Story in the 1950s, the 1988's Do the Right Thing. She received her first Oscar nomination for playing Mama Lucas in the hit film American Gangster. She was born on the 27th of October in 1922, but she has experience on stage, in television, and in films. And she started acting when she was a teenager, and she started studying her craft at a company called the American Negro Theater. And a company, it educated and it promoted a lot of other prominent figures in the Black community, actors such as Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier. And she also attended Hunter College. So Ruby Dee attended Hunter College. And she had her first major career breakthrough in 1946 when she took on the title role in a Broadway production called Anna Lucasta. In the same year. Okay, here we go. Sorry, guys. I just got lost for a second. She took on the title role in Anna Lucasta, and she met Ossie Davis while she was performing in a play called Jeb. They got married, and they had 3 children. And again, the Jackie Robinson Story, playing the wife to, Jackie Robinson in the character Jackie Robinson. She also landed a starring role on Broadway in the Lorraine Hainsbury play called A Raisin in the Sun in 1959, and which was later developed into an adaptation as a film with the same name. And she earned great acclaim for her portrayal of Ruth Younger in a drama about a struggling African-American family where Sidney Poitier, played her husband, and 2 years later, she reprised her role in the film version of the play. And she co-starred with her husband to appear in a play called Hurley Victorious. And her husband, Ossie Davis, wrote this Southern comedy, and he and Ruby Dee co-starred in the hit together. And they reprised their roles for the 1963 film adaptation. And over the years, they worked on a number of projects together. They were very active in the civil rights movement, and they participated in marches. And like I stated before, they advocated for racial equality with their work. And she's just so phenomenal. Ruby Dee is so phenomenal. And just in case you're just joining me, I see that a couple of other people have been joining. We're kicking off Black History Month for the first half of the show. Talked about Levar Burton, and with the second half of the show, I'm talking about Ruby Dee. And again, in 1968, Ruby Dee worked behind the scenes, and she was a co-writer for a screenplay called Uptight, and she starred in this drama. And on the small screen, she appeared in the popular primetime soap opera Peyton Place. And later, she had her own series on public television with her husband called With Ossie and Ruby. Through the 1970s and 80s, Dee gave a number of stellar performances. And again, I'm reading from sources that I've collected from LeVar Burton and Ruby Dee. I'm talking about prominent figures in the Black community as we all kick off Black History Month this week, and as we all celebrate Black History Month for the month of February. I'm just reading from sources that I've gathered from, the internet. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Dee gave a number of stellar performances. She picked up Drama Desk and Obie Awards for the 1970 play Bozeman, and Lena, and an Emmy Award nomination for her role in the 1979 miniseries Roots, The Next Generation. So again, I encourage you all to watch the movie Roots to learn about the historical figure Alex Haley and the 7 generations of his family. But again, I encourage you to exercise caution as you watch this movie. And if you decide to share it with kids, please, please, please watch it yourselves first, because the content is powerful, but it's also very graphic. She wrote the book and lyrics for the musical Take It From the Top, which her son, his name is Guy, composed the music, and her husband directed the production. In the early 1980s, she starred as an author named Zora Neale Hurston in the play Zora Is My Name, which later aired on PBS. She and her husband both won positive notices for their work with director Spike Lee on his film Do the Right Thing in 1989. In 1991, she won an Emmy Award for her work on the television movie Decoration Day. In 1998, her and her husband published With Ossie and Ruby, In This Life Together, a look at their life experiences during their 50 years of marriage. The book received warm reviews for its humor and candor, and she also wrote and performed the one-woman show My One Good Nerve around this time. She suffered a tremendous loss in 2005 when the actor and civil rights activist Ossie Davis passed away. But she was filming a movie in New Zealand at the time, and she had been working on a film called Retirement with her husband that same year. And they, again, after his death, on her and her husband's behalf, they won a Grammy Award for the best spoken word album for the audio version with Ossie and Ruby. And again, it's so phenomenal. I'm going to pause right there for a second. It's just so phenomenal to see, how the careers of both LeVar Burton and Ruby Dee, how they've been able to accomplish so much and throughout their lives. And I think that when we talk about not only, reading and literacy, and when we talk about the arts, whether it's screenwriting, playwriting, storytelling, performing, singing, any form of art, when we talk about these things, I think that it's important to note that you have to work from the inside out in order to convey your message. Because I think that, when you're acting, when you're singing, when you're reading, and when you're creating some form of art, whether it's through drawing or sculpting or painting or anything of that nature, I think that you are telling a story. So both of these prominent figures told a story with their work. So I think that that's really, really important to understand. And I think that it's also important to understand that in the Bible, one guy that I really, really like is Joseph. And he was known for being the interpreter of dreams. So if you read the book of Genesis, you can learn all about Joseph. I don't have time to go through the entire book now, but I encourage you all to go through the book of Genesis and read about Joseph. Joseph, I think, is really, really great. Is a really, really great because, again, God had blessed him with the gift of interpreting dreams. And I think that it's important to recognize our spiritual gifts. I think it's important to recognize their spiritual gifts. And in the Bible, Joseph trusted God no matter how bad his situation was. He was skilled, he was conscientious, and he saved not only his people, but all of Egypt from starvation. But he was a little naive, and he was a little kind of uppity and conceited about, his gift and how he chose to share it with his family. But even though he suffered from a lot of setbacks, he learned about the importance of humility and wisdom. So he was able to demonstrate that as time went past. So he was a hard worker, even when he worked as a slave. Again, read the book of Genesis, you can learn all about him, but I'm just giving you guys, pointers from my notes. He loved his family and he forgave them. His brothers were really, really envious of his gifts. His brothers were just really, really, really envious of him because they felt like Joseph had something that they did not have. So I think that, again, when we talk about our spiritual gifts, we have to be mindful of what they are, and we have to be mindful of who we share them with, because everybody is not happy about our gifts, and everyone does not view our gifts the way we view our gifts. And everyone's not going to be open to looking at our gifts or us using our gifts, especially when it comes down to helping others. And I think that a lot of lessons that Joseph learned in the Bible, and I think that a lot of the lessons that kind of correspond with how we should look at things now is that I think that it's important to note that God will give us the strength to endure our painful circumstances, and that forgiveness is always possible with the help of God. Sometimes suffering is a part of God's plan to bring about a greater good. And when you have God, when God's all you have, God is enough. And I think that that's what Joseph realized, in his story. His brothers came to Egypt to buy food, and after many tests, and he forgave them. And I think, again, because of the way he was treated by his brothers, I think that Joseph, he found it in his heart to forgive his brothers for their envy and for their jealousy. And God had given Joseph the gift of interpreting dreams. And again, he told the cupbearer his dream, and that he would be free to return to his former position. And Joseph told the baker his dream meant that he would be hanged. Both interpretations proved true. So again, I'm just reading my notes. I encourage you all, again, to read the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis. But again, I think that it's imperative to understand what our spiritual gifts are. I think it's important for all of us to realize that everybody's not open to our gifts. And just in case you don't know what a spiritual gift is, a spiritual gift is a God-given talent or ability. We as Christians are blessed with the gifts by the Holy Spirit, and that allows us to serve others in their lives and to the church. And from a scriptural standpoint, I think that we as Christians have to understand that spiritual gifts or abilities or skills that are provided to us and that we're blessed with, we are supposed to use those gifts to build up, inspire, and support the church. And our gifts are supposed to aid other people in their lives. I think that oftentimes people kind of get caught up in their gifts and they forget that, their spiritual gifts are not just for their own benefit or their own merit. It's to help others. People should not be coming with their hands out all the time in terms of just expecting things in return because they did a good deed or because they did something that, God laid on their heart to do. Again, it's about uplifting others, using our spiritual gifts in order to aid other people in their lives. And all of us have different gifts. And just because our gifts are not the same, it doesn't mean that, we are, our gifts are not as valuable or as important. It just means that God has blessed us with the gifts in order to use that to help others. So we are all useful in some way or another. God has put us on this earth so that we could use the gifts that he's blessed us with in order to make a difference in our community. And also, I often think about it because, again, I struggle with perfectionism a lot. And I often think about it, of the fact that, we can live beyond our brokenness as people of God. We can live beyond the pain and the anguish that we may have experienced in the past. And I think that telling an authentic story through art, like I've just described, whether it's through writing, whether it's through acting or performing, or whether it's through screenwriting, sculpting, painting, or whatever the case may be, drawing, whatever the case may be. Again, it's all to tell a story. We all have a story to tell. And with Levar Burton and with Ruby Dee, they worked from the inside out in order to convey the messages that they wanted to convey to their colleagues and to all of the children, the young adults, and even the elders who followed their work over the years. They were not envious of anybody else's, or at least they didn't come across that way. They were not envious of anybody else's success or anybody else's gifts because they had their own gifts to give. God blessed them with the ability to reach people the way that they reached people, through their activism, through their advocacy, through their performances, through their writing, and even as producers. Even with the story of Roots, they both had an opportunity to tell a story from a historical standpoint so that the Black community could understand where we come from as a people. So I think that's all of that is important to know as we continue to talk about Levar Burton and Ruby Dee and the work that they've done, and as we celebrate Black History Month throughout the month of February. And again, Joseph in the Bible and throughout the book of Genesis, the fact that he trusted God with his gifts spoke volume. And even though he was kind of naive and green to, what things looked like, when he went through what he went through, it still didn't change his perspective on things in terms of why he was blessed with the gift of interpreting dreams. He learned how to use that gift to help others. He saved his people. And I think that's important to note. Again, our gifts are not simply for us. It's not about just fulfilling our own needs or having titles. Our gifts are not just supposed to benefit us. This is not about, us having titles or bragging about titles or bragging about our abilities or our skills in order to make someone else feel inferior to us. It's about uplifting everybody. It's about inspiring everyone. It's about encouraging everyone to be better and to do better, and to allow them to feel comfortable about who they are. And I think that Joseph in the Bible was a crystal clear demonstration of that. And even though he was young, it didn't mean anything. He was young. Joseph was a young dreamer. He was a gifted young man with many skills and abilities. And I find that sometimes, even if you're young, there are people that are going to be envious of you because of your gifts. And I see that all the time, not just in my personal life, but I've seen it in the lives of others. And it's not anything personal when someone is envious of you because of the spiritual gifts that God has blessed you with. It's an insecurity that another person has. So someone being envious of your gifts that God has blessed you with, that your Heavenly Father the man above has blessed you with. It's not about anything else. It's simply an insecurity that someone has about themselves or about their own abilities that they really need to dig deep and figure out. But again, I think Joseph is a crystal clear role model, an example of what it means to be, a young adult nowadays. And as I was reading through the book of Genesis, and when I was looking at this story, I definitely, I was just definitely admired by just everything that, Joseph went through. I mean, because it's so relatable. Because, I think that it's important to share your story with others and to talk about your story with others. How can you reach people if you haven't gone through anything? You can't really minister to anybody unless you have had the opportunity to experience, trials and tribulations. So I think that Joseph's story in the Bible and throughout the book of Genesis, I think that by him having his brothers who were envious of him in the beginning, but later apologized for their jealousy, and by Joseph being the bigger person and being the strong young man that he was, by him accepting their apologies and moving forward with his life, in spite of everything that he went through. God was molding him and shaping him into a better version of himself. And I find that astonishing because I think that God uses that in our lives in order to build us up and in order to, what's what I'm looking for? In order to mold us and to shape us into what he wants us to represent to others in his eyes. I'm going to read we have about 10 minutes left in the show, so I'm going to read a couple of Bible verses that correspond with spiritual gifts and that correspond with tonight's topic. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 11 says, "If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do it so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen." 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 14 says, "Do not neglect your gift, which was given to you through prophecy when the body of elders laid their hands on you." 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 6 says that for this reason I remind you to fan and to flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 says that so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers. Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23 says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law." Romans chapter 12, verses 6 through 8, it says that we have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophecy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. So these are just some of the Bible verses that I gathered from some of the scriptures that I've read, and also, just from the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis. And again, I encourage you all to read the book of Genesis and learn a lot about Joseph. Joseph is a young man that I admire in the Bible a lot because I feel like he is like me in many ways. Because he was kind of hard on himself, and he was still very, very green to a lot of things in terms of just in the beginning, just not recognizing his unlimited potential, and gradually and throughout the passage and throughout the book of Genesis, he learned about how powerful his gifts were, and he never used. And what I like about the story is that he never used his gifts in order to tear someone else down, and he never used his leadership, his position as a leader, to diminish anyone else. He always used it to uplift others. In spite of everything that he went through, he was the clear role model and representation of what it meant to be a young man with integrity and with character. Even when everyone else was not, abiding by the same principles, he was still able to display that level of character, that level of integrity and accountability for himself and for everyone else around him. So I think that it's important to give kudos to Joseph in the Bible, for displaying that and for walking through everything and persevering through everything. And I think that his story deserves to be told to more young children so that they can feel empowered and encouraged, and so that they can look at him and say, I can do it. So as we wrap up the show, I'm going to talk about a few announcements, but I want to thank you all for listening to tonight's broadcast. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate every single last one of you who has tuned in to tonight's show. I appreciate every single one of you. And again, it's been 5 months since the Beauty in Us radio has been on the air with Awesome God Radio. I want to thank my Awesome God Radio family. I want to thank my own family. I want to thank my church family at the Messiah Community Church for tuning in. I want to thank every single person who supports me in this journey. And it's only up from here, and this is only the beginning of the journey. But again, tonight we were talking about Ruby D. We were celebrating her work, and we're also talking about Levar Burton. And this just goes to show you that, you can be anything that you want to be, and you can do anything that you set your mind to. I think, again, as we wrap up tonight's show, I want to talk about the importance of reading and writing, for children. I'm an author. I used to struggle with reading comprehension in school, but my English teacher in middle school, and even earlier on in elementary school, he told my mom that I would be reading several books at a time, even though I was struggling with reading comprehension at the time. Context clues, main ideas, all of that. I was struggling with that. And now look at where I am. I'm an award-winning author who is helping other people, with the same struggles. So again, it's important to recognize your unlimited potential, and it's important to recognize what your gifts are. And it's important for you to have those people in your corner to give you a hand up. And I think that that's what Levar Burton and Ruby D did, not just for themselves and not just for their own titles, but in order to benefit others. And we all have a story to tell. We all have a message to convey. We all have our own individual experiences. And it's our responsibility to our ancestors to show up, to be present, and to make an impact, for our communities. We have a responsibility to Ruby D. We have a responsibility to Levar Burton, to be all of what we can be while we're here. Because truth be told, you can accomplish a lot of things in the world, but it does not necessarily mean that you can make an impact. You can accomplish things in life and still not make an impact. So it's important for all of us to sit down and figure out what our gifts are. And in terms of literacy, and in terms of reading and writing, and in terms of just using the arts, whether it's visual art, whether it's music, whether it's performing, whether it's singing, songwriting, or whatever, it's important to use that gift to our advantage. And as we continue to move through, and as we continue to navigate our way through the COVID-19 pandemic with all of the restrictions that have been implemented and that have not been lifted yet, I want to encourage all of you to just sit down, read a good book. I encourage you all to sit down and write down and to figure out what your gifts are, so that you can figure out how to use those gifts to help others, and you can start your journey, and you can continue on your journey, and you can learn and grow and become better versions of yourself, become better men, become better women. So it's really, really great to see. And I'm so glad that I've had the opportunity to sit down before you and to talk about this. And I'm glad that I have a huge support system in my personal life and in my professional life. And I'm glad that I have people who believe in me, even when, I count myself out sometimes, even when I do beat myself up sometimes. I'm thankful and I'm appreciative of everyone who's there. So I think that I'm going to say a prayer before we close the show and before we wrap up the show this evening. But before I say a prayer, I'm going to make another announcement. Next week, I'm going to switch gears, and I'm going to still talk about another Black male and Black female figure. I'm going to talk about Walter Dean Myers, and I'm also going to talk about Shirley Chisholm. So I've been thinking about all of the historical Black figures, and those two come to mind. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later this week, and I'm going to drop hints. So stay tuned. But feel free to bow your heads and close your eyes as I wrap us up in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for giving us another opportunity to sit before you today. Thank you for giving us another opportunity to see another day and to live another day. We thank you for all of what you've done. We thank you for all of the spiritual gifts that you've blessed us with. I pray that this broadcast has blessed, someone out there. I pray that you just use this platform and use this show and use this broadcast, not just for now, but in the future, to bless others, to enrich the lives of others. I pray that for every person, young, old, every man, woman, and child, I pray that you help them recognize what their spiritual gifts are. I pray that you give them the encouragement, give them the support, give them the guidance and the resources they need so that they can continue to be all of what you've called them to be, and so that they can do what you've called them to do and what you've laid in their hearts to do, Heavenly Father. I thank you for giving me another opportunity to share some more scriptures and more of your word tonight, Lord God. And I just pray that you can continue to just, keep all of us at peace as we continue to navigate our ways through this pandemic and through this dark season and these troubling times, Lord Heavenly Father. We love you, we worship you, we thank you for showering us with your unconditional love and your mercy and your compassion and your forgiveness. Even with all of our faults and with our misdeeds and with all of our mistakes, you still love us anyway. With glory, with majesty, dominion, and power, I pray all of those prayers, and I thank you for everything. And I know that there's much more in store. And in the precious name of your Son, Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen. So, thanks again, you guys, for tuning in. Again, stay tuned. Make an appointment to meet me back here at 6 p.m. next Tuesday on February 16th. So we're going to have a conversation about Walter D. Myers and Shirley Chisholm. So, again, make an appointment to meet me back here at 6 p.m. next Tuesday, February 16th, 2021. I will see you all next week. I thank you all for tuning in. And again, I encourage you all to stay safe, stay healthy, wear your mask, wash your hands, keep your distance from everybody, preferably 6 feet. Don't be nasty. And you guys take care.